so So as I said, if you are just joining us, you haven't done this, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and something that's brought you some joy this week. And so I want to welcome everyone to our session today, focusing on moving from trauma to resiliency, and really focusing on some kind of concrete ways to do that. So since the last time we met in November, we've had our affinity groups, we've had time to meet and hear feedback from everyone. And some of the feedback that we were receiving is really having some opportunity to maybe get a little more specific about how do you take these trauma-informed principles, these broad principles, and really bring them to life in the organization. And so, you know, as I was reviewing the last presentation that we did in November, you know, I think having a little bit more grounding in this content will help you utilize the tools and resources we shared last time with a little bit better. So, you know, heard that feedback and really would, you know, incorporating it into today's session. So just a few reminders as we get started. Please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. If you have questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat, use the raised hand. If I don't kind of respond, also just feel free to take yourself off of mute and just let me know. Kathy King is with us for the beginning part of the session here today, but I will be here solo, so might need an actual kind of verbal indication that you want to share, and I welcome questions and interaction along the way. So please don't hesitate to ask when those questions arise. So in terms of our agenda for today, we are going to be taking away key takeaways for today is really grounding those trauma-informed principles and looking at them in alignment with health equity. So really holding those two priorities that we've been talking about throughout this process, both the trauma-informed and equity focus. And then really, as I indicated, getting more specific into some strategies to move towards action, and then thinking about how do you actually apply this to organizational change. So along the way, we'll have some breakout time for some team discussion as well as we kind of go through our presentation this morning. So I did want to start with doing a quick breakout just to get us all grounded back in this work. So we'll have a quick discussion in teams and just to, in the breakout groups, you know, just to kind of get grounded in thinking about what is really important to remember about stress and toxic stress and trauma, specifically also with an eye towards understanding racism as a specific form of trauma. And how are you seeing this informing your own work and your day-to-day, and also priorities of the organization. So we'll break out for just like 5-10 minutes, share any that kind of came up in your conversations with your team members, just as you were kind of getting regrounded in the work.
I'll start.
Great.
So I'm Joan Ayala from Hillside, and you know, we talked about just, you know, the stress that comes from racism, whether it's intentional or unintentional, and then also talked about the pandemic as yet another stress on top of it. And we also talked about the fact that because so many things are now virtual and we're not with people like in person, sometimes it may be difficult to recognize that people are under stress. And we may not see it as clearly as if we were in person with them.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. You know, that's such an important point in that we might need to be a little more intentional in asking people how they're doing and how they're really doing, right? Like, because it might be easier to overlook, or, sometimes I find myself in Zoom getting right into business and like, just taking that pause to really connect with people. So thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts or reflections that teams had in thinking about stress, toxic stress, how it's influencing your work in this moment in time, your priorities?
Hi, I'm from Trillium, and we focused a lot on the first two questions. Some of the observations we had related to toxic stress were that it can be contagious and being aware of that. And then just recognizing it exists doesn't help anyone to pretend it doesn't. And then exercising just some like self-talk, like what's in my control, what's not, keeping in mind that it can be cumulative. So, and that I think factors into the second question, which, multiple identities probably experience stress in different ways. So we have a very diverse work environment, but there's still work to be done. So sometimes there's a disconnect there. So that's where we landed in a short amount of time.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Susanna, for sharing that. And, I think your reflection on kind of how toxic stress can really be contagious, like really being mindful of what you're being exposed to, and, being practicing kind of strategies to kind of be aware of what is your own stress, what's other people's stress, because it is easily could be absorbed. And like, unlike other professions where you might be exposed to toxic material, where you might get like a little badge where it shows your exposure has reached the limit and you need to like go get detoxed, you know what I mean? Like we don't have that. So we need to be kind of mindful of that for ourselves, for our colleagues, for our workforce, and what we're exposed to. So it sounds like there's some really rich discussions. So I'm going to return us to the presentation. And we're gonna, there we go, kind of hop into some of the material. So just reminding us of kind of why we are doing this work, and what does it really mean to be trauma informed. It's recognizing the prevalence of trauma. I think that goes without saying in this moment of time, in terms of people's personal experiences, but the collective trauma that we've all been experiencing over the past 2 years. So, recognizing that this touches everyone, our workforce and those we serve, and then really understanding, and I think this goes to, what Joan was highlighting for us too, is how it can affect everyone, and being aware of those signs that someone may be being impacted by trauma, how it is shown, but it can also be, we can see it in an organizational level, a program level, a system level, in terms of those entities being impacted by trauma as well, and the way in which people might operate within those systems can be impacted. And so being mindful of that. And then what we're really focusing on is, this third area is, now that we have this realization, we can recognize this, is how do we respond differently? So that's where we're really going to be putting our attention today, is what are the actions we can take to shift the way that we do our work, to be responsive versus reactive to trauma, because trauma can be, when it shows up, can be very triggering. And so we can be in a place of reactivity, and again, individually and collectively and systemically. And so really thinking about, especially right now, how can we move to being in a more responsive place and intentional about the way we are kind of creating the way we do our work to be mindful of trauma and to act in a way that can promote resiliency and recovery. And along with that, this fourth R that's been kind of added to this trauma-informed work is really making sure that we're resisting re-traumatization. So really being aware of potential processes, practices, ways of interacting with each other that could actually be harmful to others. And so making sure that we're looking at the way we do our work, deliver our services through this lens to think about how might that experience be for someone who's experienced trauma, toxic stress, systemic racism, other oppression due to identities, and making sure that we're just, looking at it through those different angles and where there is our opportunity for change so that we're not causing further harm. So the 4 R's we can think of as on our umbrella. That's our overarching framework for our organizational culture and our outcomes. We're paying attention to that. When we think about trauma-informed care, what we're really thinking about is that building awareness within the organization around the prevalence and the impact of trauma. So those first 2 R's that we talked about, and doing that through training, through supervision, through coaching. There's many resources to really build that collective knowledge and understanding across an organization. And awareness is fundamental, but it's not going to change practice. And that's where we're really trying to move towards, is that trauma responsive care and those practices, is that we're really looking at organizational change, processes and policies that promote health and recovery. So thinking about how are we actually changing the way we do our work, and that we're institutionalizing that so it doesn't live with a person. Champions are important to this work and really help it move forward until kind of you have more and more kind of those early adapters, and then the rest of the organization kind of taking suit and really embracing these practices. But if it lives just with one person or a few people, and there's not that kind of ways to make it standardized throughout the organization, when those people leave, the change oftentimes leaves with them. So really thinking about that, how are you embedding these changes into your practice? And then I do just want to make reference to trauma-specific care, because that's a component, but sometimes when people hear trauma-informed, they're thinking of trauma treatment. And good trauma treatment is important. There's a lot of great evidence-based practices, but we know that not everyone is going to receive those practices, will get connected to services. We hope that they do, but everyone does, but they're going to touch different parts of your systems and the services and supports that you provide. So making sure the way we do our work is trauma informed, is supportive of healing and recovery, and in addition to actual trauma treatment that people may receive. So wanted to get more specifically into these core values of a trauma responsive organization. And these are grounded in the work of Roger Fallot and Maxine Harris, and has been expanded by SAMHSA, but really thinking about what do these things mean. I'm just going to start with a general overview, but then we're going to go, as I said, deeper into actually thinking about specific strategies that operationalize each of these values. So we start with safety. And when we think about trauma responsive care, we're also thinking through the lens of both the individuals we serve as well as our staff. Those have to be held together. We're a community. And if our staff aren't experiencing these values and they're, as they're working in the organization, they're not going to be well positioned to then deliver them in turn to the people that they serve. So it's twofold. When we think about safety, we're thinking about both physical safety. So what is it like in your physical space? Thinking about things like the parking lot, when you enter the building, but it's also that psychological safety. What is the first contact like with your organization? How are you greeted? How are you welcomed? Thinking from a staff perspective, if they have a concern, is it clear who to go to? How is that supervisory relationship? So we really need to pay attention to both sides of that safety coin. So thinking about both the physical and the psychological. Thinking about trust and transparency, that's really being clear about roles, responsibilities, processes, oftentimes when we design things, we are designing it from our own lens and kind of what works for us as organizations. And we can speak sometimes in our own jargon. And it's not always clear to recipients of care, kind of what someone's role is and kind of how to access or enter into services or what's even expected of them. So being very explicit and clear about that, and being clear too about the boundaries of your role and what you can do and what you might not be able to do. And if it's something that goes beyond your role, like how can you help maybe connect them with someone who can do it, but not overpromise, something that's not really in your purview to deliver or not part of kind of your role or function. And again, both with staff and with those we serve. Empowerment, voice, and choice is really around making sure that there's true opportunity for authentic voice and input, whether it's someone's own care and having choice and input into what that looks like, or staff as well, as there's changes, decisions being made. Is there room for their voice in those processes? And when it's solicited, is it used? Is there a feedback loop to how it's being used, how decisions were made, if decisions might look different than what staff might have provided input? And that there's real opportunity for people to exercise that so that their sense of power can be restored. Along the same lines is looking at collaboration. So thinking about opportunities for authentic and true collaboration. There's power sharing. Oftentimes relationships in the system have traditionally been hierarchical. There's a service provider and, someone entering to services may feel like that person has power over them. So how are you intentionally partnering with people, sharing power that's explicit and clear. And when there's time where there is a power differential, that's also explicit and clear. And that, that people know if there's choices that might be limited in some way, what those choices are and what the, potential ramifications of those are. Peer support is really looking at having support from someone with lived experience and having that available to someone. And, so someone who might be going through, kind of has been impacted by trauma, that there's someone who can walk along with them that is familiar with that journey, has walked in those steps and can maybe provide support in a different way than a service provider. And then paying attention to that intersection with cultural, historical, and gender issues when we think about trauma, but also racist and oppressive things that have happened over centuries to individuals and groups who have been marginalized, and to make sure that we are aware of that experience as well. So I'm going to delve more into safety and trust. So thinking about safety, our rationale for this is that we know that people have exposed to trauma and adversity have had lifetime experience with feeling unsafe. Fundamentally, the world does not feel safe to them based on their experiences. And so we have to just be mindful of that as we're engaging in relationship, that, there's not just going to be an extension of trust for someone automatically just based on your role or your desire to help or, partner with someone, that individuals that has to be shown and developed over time. And that's done through different strategies. So you can see here some thoughts about how that can be achieved. Thinking about your facilities, that they're maintained, that they're welcoming, that there's opportunities for privacy for folks, personal artifacts. So thinking about staff, when they are on site, is there an opportunity for them to personalize the space in some way? So, they feel like kind of they can see themselves in the space. And it can also think about what's on your walls. Do people entering your space, do they see themselves in terms of the art that's available, the color of the space that is there? Does it feel like I can see myself here? And I think that's really knowing your clients, your partners, and your colleagues. Who are the people who work there, and who you serve? What are their backgrounds? And really, kind of making sure that's reflected in the physical space as well. Safety and psychological safety is often conveyed through our body language and our tone. So being aware of that in our interactions, and making sure that we ourselves are self-regulated when we're engaging with other people, and knowing that much of what we convey is conveyed through our nonverbal behavior. Making sure when there is aggression that it's addressed, and that doesn't have to be like overt physical aggression. Aggression can look and show up in lots of different ways, but how are people held accountable? How do we have conversations when that emerges? And what are the opportunities for restoring relationship when it happens? And just being present and engaged, that really creates safety. And I think, that came up on some of the affinity calls that I had with folks about how that's just become such a priority for folks right now in this time of either working remotely or hybrid, just being visible and engaged with staff to be present. And then just some concrete things around signage and visuals in the space. So I just want to pause before kind of going further, just to kind of reflect with folks about things, maybe other things that you're using in your own organization around safety, and also some things that you think could be potential barriers to promoting safety, things that you've seen that have gotten in the way that you might have had to address. So just really want to open up to a little dialogue. Oh, Crystal, I'm sorry, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, so I'm just looking at some of the things that you had under safety.
Mm-hmm.
And while I agree with everything that's there, I think a lot of the interpretation is subject to the person,
Okay.
either receiving or giving it out. So when I look at the stay regulated, body language, tone, address aggression, what's common, if it's not so common, it feels very common for me, being a Black woman who wants to address something that needs to be addressed. It can sometimes look like aggression or be typed, stereotyped that way, or my tone. And it's just, I can't win for losing, or, one of those things. And that's part of the trauma that,
Yes.
I have been exposed to. So while these are still good statements, I think it's all, relative to a person's experience, or people's experiences that help shape what tone or aggression might look like.
Yeah, no, Crystal, thank you so much for raising and elevating that, because I think that's really important, because I think what you're describing is in you using your voice and expressing and sharing your experience, you could encounter re-traumatization by the way that's received and labeled by others, right? And so really, I think that is what part of this work is really kind of having those more explicit discussions within the workplace about what does that really look like, and being and calling it out when that happens, because like you said, you then are put in a position where you can't win for, you can't win for losing. Is that the expression? Yeah. But you know what? Yes. So yeah, I think that's really important as we're thinking about people's experience and what we're labeling as aggressive, and how we're interpreting others' behaviors, for sure. I think I saw another hand raised. Anyone else wanted to share?
I was just going to say that I was thinking the same thing, Crystal, and just having to, in some ways, mute a strong feeling and not being able to communicate the way the communication needs to be at that moment, not that there can't be some repair if it goes over, but having to monitor about things that are so strong, it sort of makes me think of the healing event at the U of R for Black students after, I don't know, I guess it was maybe 10 years ago when the one student died, and there were all these ground rules. And finally, one young woman stood up and said, "We're upset. And there are all these ground rules for this healing event. Like, why aren't we setting the ground rules for how we can engage here? We need to, like, we're upset. So we're allowed to weep quietly, but we're not allowed to show sort of a big emotion." And I think that big emotion is called for at times.
Yeah. 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 Ellen, as you're describing that situation, to that point, like sometimes outrage is appropriate, right? Like, and there needs to be space for that as well. For someone to feel like they can express their true emotion is an opportunity to create safety. Like you can contain that, like, right? It's okay to express your truth in this setting, and that we're going to be receptive to hear that. Yes. So I'm just noting some of the comments coming in the chat. People tend to confuse safety and discomfort. Absolutely. Yeah. The utilization of I statements can be beneficial. So, right. Yeah. So some of these conversations are not going to be easy conversations. They are going to cause discomfort. That doesn't mean that someone's unsafe. Right. How do we create environments in our organizations that allow for those conversations to happen? For sure. So thank you. I think that was really important direction for the conversation to go. So we're going to move into talking about trust and trustworthiness. So thinking about people who have been exposed to trauma and adversity may come to question others, particularly authority figures. So thinking about, people who have, kind of experienced trauma at the hand of people who have been in roles of authority in their lives. And that can be in interpersonal family dynamics, but it could also be people who've experienced that with other relationships, whether it's school or, interacting with law enforcement or other people in positions of authority. And so, again, that trust needs to be earned over time, and some strategies around that is really making sure that we're talking in plain language and, not using jargon, that we're being clear about what we're saying. And so that we are saying the same thing and understand that. And when we don't know, being that it's okay and there's permission to kind of get clarity, being, again, clear and consistent around expectations. It's coming back to the body language and tone, and being self-aware, but also I think, as that was just raised now, being curious if, if someone has their body language or tone might not match what you expect, instead of getting in a place of reactivity, can you be curious about it? And again, that's going to help create that sense of safety and trust to have conversations that might need to be had and allow that to happen. So that goes to that curious mind set. Targeted feedback. And what I mean here is that sometimes we tend to be vague in the feedback we share with others, because again, these can be uncomfortable conversations, and that can lead to mistrust. So really, even if it's something that's difficult, being very clear about it. There's that saying, clear is kind. And so saying it in the most direct way that you can. Hang in there. And I want to just be clear about this one, is that it's not saying that anyone should tolerate being mistreated in any way, but just remembering that trust doesn't happen overnight, that, things that needs to be experienced over time, and that every interaction is an opportunity to build trust. but it's also an opportunity for trust to unravel. So, I think we've probably been in situations where you feel like you're building towards a trusting relationship with someone, and then they do something, and that can really unravel what has been built very quickly. So trust builds over time, but can also kind of come apart rather fast when we're not being mindful of it and coming back together to restore when it's been broken. Really focusing on others, strengths, communicating that unconditional care, and this reframe of attention seeking as attachment seeking. So people have experienced trauma, especially early in their lives, may have behaviors or interactions that can be misinterpreted as someone trying to seek attention. Oftentimes it's that they're actually seeking relationship and doing it in the best way that they know how. So I want to share this diagram of really getting into this intersection of psychological safety and cultural responsiveness, and kind of see these how they are on two different axes here. So you kind of see that we have high access and low access, conditional belonging and unconditional belonging. And, beyond kind of different groups, you can think back to being in school and, how these different groups can kind of form. And so really paying attention to this intersection. So we know when people are feeling or not feeling excluded, are being excluded, that belonging is set by whoever is the dominant group. What the conditions to belong are set by that group, and anyone outside of that is, kind of outside of that box and marginalized, and they have low access to to enter into that space. When we move to the right and we see segregated, that's our, when we have groups who could form outside of that dominant culture. And so there's affinity within group, but there is an opportunity for access into that dominant space. When we move into integrated, we're looking at that there is access, but that access is conditional. So as long as you fit into the norm, then, and so this is where we can see tokenism that happens, then there is access. But really what we're looking for is included, and that is when there is both high access and unconditional belonging. So there is a welcoming to all in this space, and you'll see that in this diagram, you kind of get rid of the box, that you have those dotted lines, but then we have the squiggle because the environment is shaped by the community and welcomes the diversity of that is brought by this inclusivity, and that the norms in that environment are shaped then by this diversity of perspective, and there's true inclusion. And so these are things that are going to promote psychological safety and trust when we can move to, kind of these conditions, and that we're focusing on environments that really are promoting and are individual to the needs of to all, and that are connected and truly equitable. So I'm going to stop there just to see if people have reflections, questions on that diagram, thoughts about trust. Anything anyone wants to share at this point? Okay. So some other things just to kind of think about in terms of creating safety and trustworthiness is really thinking about how you promote and hold space. And so some strategies around there. And again, thinking about these are things that are really in your sphere of influence. This is kind of how you might be engaging with others, whether it's your colleagues, partners, or those you serve. So really practicing active listening. So, being fully present, really listening and not listening to respond, but listening to understand, being present and mindful. Not jumping into problem solving mode. So, I think many of us who've come into this type of work, we come because we want to help people solve problems and for, people to relieve kind of the pain that they may be in. And in doing that, we could inadvertently invalidate people. And so really just, honoring people where they are, trying to refrain from that temptation, and instead really helping to validate their experience and their, what they might be sharing with you. Because what we know is when we can create that space, people really just have the opportunity to discover what's in themselves and their own opportunity to usually, kind of know what their own solution is to move something forward. Really trying to make sure we're keeping our own ego out of it and our own story. I know we probably have all experienced when you share something with someone and then they jump right into telling a story about themselves. And oftentimes we're doing that to connect with someone and to say, I understand what you're going through, but sometimes it can come across and feel as a one-upmanship, right? So, oh, I experienced this true, or, you think that's bad, this is what I've been through. So really making sure that, we're being present. We're not jumping into our own story or experience, but we're being present to what the person is sharing with us. And in, this radical acceptance that we are hearing people and their truth as their truth, that we're not questioning that we're not, reflecting that can't have been true, or you might have misunderstood, or any of that we're really just allowing people and hearing people's story and what their experience is, and that we believe them. And also creating space where, I think just as was shared earlier, what emotions come up, that's okay. And sometimes those emotions can be big, and that we can have space for that and allow that to occur. And sometimes that can create some discomfort, right, when those emotions do arise. But we also know that emotions arise, and then they also, when they can be expressed and validated, will also pass. And so, just allowing and creating that space can really go a long way to hold and create safety and trust with others. So moving into empowerment, voice and choice, and collaboration. So we know that people who have experienced trauma have been exposed to situations, like ultimately trauma is this sense of loss of control, right? And so really that we organize our environments to help to create and promote that sense of regaining some control over where they can. Oftentimes we can do this and support this by really recognizing individual strength and experience. So many times, I have noted in working with folks who have experienced trauma that they have, well, not that sometimes they have tremendous strength, right? And to through their experience and living through what they've experienced. And so really naming that, because sometimes they don't see that as a strength, and they don't recognize that. And there's so much skills there that can be tapped into to help to continue to build and promote resiliency. So really naming those, calling those to attention, maintaining and holding that belief in everyone's ability to heal and recover. Sometimes with trauma, there's this sense of a loss of hope and not feeling that that is possible. And so sometimes our role is really to hold that. And I think in this moment in time too, 2 years into this pandemic, this collective experience, people are really, they're tired. they're burnt out, it is harder and harder, I think, to kind of maintain that sense of hope. And so when we can do that for each other, we can kind of ignite it in each other as well. And that collectively we have the ability to heal and recover too. Allowing voice and goal setting, promoting self-advocacy skills. And again, these are things that we might have to help build in someone. They might not have had the ability to practice and to self-advocate. And so helping people do that. And again, we're not only thinking about individuals we serve, but our staff as well, and to help build that. And so that we have opportunity when we think that we really are inviting our voices to the table, that people know what that means and that they have practice doing that. Just having a seat at the table is not enough. We have to make sure people are coming with the skills to be able to share what their experience, what's on their mind, what they want to contribute, and not assume just because someone has a seat that means that they are actually in a position to really give voice to their kind of experience. And that staff and professionals can kind of play a role and to be a facilitator for that process. When we think about collaboration, again, knowing that people with trauma and extreme adversity also have a history at the, kind of maltreatment and oppression and abuse at the hands of others. So without that trust and without knowing that kind of they're being invited, they might have a real reluctance to collaborate, understandably. So really making sure that, again, there's authentic opportunity to partner, that we kind of model what that collaboration looks like. We're clear about those roles and responsibilities. We're inviting that there's authentic shared decision-making, and that we make those processes clear about what that really looks like, what it means. There's feedback loops around with that, so that people don't just are told that they're collaborating, but they actually feel part of a collaborative process, and they can see how their input is leading to some kind of change or decision-making process. So before we go into peer support, I want to just pause again, have a moment for reflection, input, things that people, maybe other kind of strategies that people have used to promote choice and voice and empowerment, collaboration. Rather quiet group today. I'm sure I know there's things happening in your organizations.
Well, I'm a talker.
Okay, thank you, Crystal.
I'll give you something. I just looking at the trauma-informed rationale, the strategies. Again, all these strategies I agree with. I use them. I think it's some of the better ways to go about working through different situations. However, sometimes these same strategies are used against people in that same way. So where an example of this would be, it's for some people and some people, it doesn't get used. That strategy doesn't get used. So when it's not across the board, you really see some inequities. I mean, you really start to see what's good for, example, because this has happened to me before, where I've been told to go to a certain person to collaborate with them. It was something that, idea that I came up with, but in order for me to be empowered enough to do so, I needed to share that and collaborate with another person who somewhat had something to do with it. I had no problem with that. I said, sure, yeah, I'll do that. But it's not being done with some of the other projects that I would say are within my realm. That other person is empowered to do whatever that it is that they need to do on that they came up with, even though it has somewhat or touches somewhat in my area. But it's the same person who's saying, let's be collaborative, and Crystal, you do this, but it's not necessarily the same for all others. So I can see where it's counterproductive if it's not consistently spread across.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that it feels like your work is being not, instead of like collaborative to elevate your work, it's being in some ways diminished, or like that you may need additional help to actually execute your plan versus like, sounds like you have an idea, you know what you want to do. And if there's someone to contribute, that would be great. But it's almost like it feels like you're being told that you need someone else to kind of carry your work forward. Yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing that example, because with any of these strategies, right, if we're not using it in a consistent way and equitably, then like what you just described to me is re-traumatizing, like, right, it's causing harm. It's not using a trauma-informed principle. It might look like it on the surface. And so I think that's like, I'm getting there in my head from what you said, right? It looks like it on the surface, but it's actually not.
Yes, you hit the
yes.
nail on the head, Elizabeth.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your patience in me getting there. I see Renee has a hand raised, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been doing quite routinely is rotating facilitation, rotating responsibilities for the meeting. So it doesn't always fall on maybe the one supervisor, it falls on the whole group, and we rotate responsibilities around to make sure that everybody feels like they are a valued and important member. And we've really found that it increases everybody's willingness to speak up and contribute to the meeting as a whole.
I love that example, Renee, because also what you're doing is investing in building your leaders, right? I mean, because you're giving people the opportunity to practice those skills. If the same person does it every time, no one else ever gets the practice of like, what does it mean to set an agenda and facilitate a conversation? So thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was just gonna share, and my colleague Andrea might have more to say about this, but so we've been doing some work with young people and around, voice and choice, and trying to sort of give them an opportunity to share. We're doing training, bringing them in to look at our materials and help us think about, whether they are speaking to young people's experiences. And I think one of the things that is happening a lot that I'm seeing in kind of like along the lines of what Crystal was talking about is, schools are saying, oh, we need to hear from our students. Let's have a panel. Let's get, all the Black students to come talk to us about issues of racism in school so we can really hear their experience and, take that into account. But there's no preparation. There's no, adults there to sort of help keep those young people safe if the questions that come at them aren't fair, or it could be re-traumatizing. It's asking a lot of students to just, and it's sort of under that guise of voice and choice, and we need to hear from people about their experiences, but I think sometimes it can be more harmful. So we've been trying to think about ways to bring to hear from young people without kind of that re-traumatization. And so Andrea, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, but it was just as Crystal was talking, I was thinking about that challenge of like, we want to hear your voice, and then, a lot of times they'll come do a panel and then nothing changes. And so then it feels like you're, asking them for their thoughts and ideas without actually using the information in any productive way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I think it happens definitely with young people, but I think it happens with lots of different groups where people want, I think it happens with families. I think it happens in so many different ways where people ask for some input, but then nothing ever changes. It's still the people in power who are asking the questions. It's still the people in power who are determining, when that voice is being heard. I think we talk with students and they're like, I've said this a million times in my classes. I've said it to the administrators at my school, and now you want me to come to a panel, but like nobody has listened to me when I've said this in multiple different ways. So really, I think, again, thinking about who has the power in the situation, if it's to tick a box, like that's super problematic. And so if it's about, again, centering you and feeling good that you listened, but there's not really something happening, I think there's so much that I just, Crystal, everything you're saying, I'm like nodding my head, yes, yes, yes. But I think, yeah, there's so many ways that these same practices can be used. And I think white supremacy culture is super strong and invisible and dangerous and not named and addressed enough. And we need to really be considering what is coming up right now. What are those characteristics? We need to know them. We need to name them. We need to be thinking about them all the time and seeing them when they come up, because it is the default that we almost can't see because it is so the air that we breathe. So everything is so important. So thank you to everyone for this conversation.
Thank you, Andrea. Any other comments or follow-ups on kind of this, or?
There was some talk in the chat. Maria wrote, maybe a better word for collaboration when it's diminishing someone's value and it's re-traumatizing. It's suppressive partnering. I thought that was pretty deep, Maria. Makes sense.
I had a few thoughts on this, if it's okay.
Sure, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and Crystal, I'm sorry that happened. That is sad. It seems like even if they were trying, or not even trying, but even if they were doing that practice, but they were doing it seemingly in a patronizing way. And I think that's where people would have to be careful. If, am I doing this, like someone said, just to check a box, just to say that I did it, but it's really patronizing. I'm not doing it because I believe in you and I believe that you have something to offer, because that's a whole different approach. And someone mentioned earlier about that spirit of curiosity, because I think if we hang on to that, then I can actually believe in the culture of my agency is better if I can hear everyone, right? Because I can come at it with like humility, not believing that I have all the answers individually, but like I really want to hear what you have, because I'm sure you have something that's completely different than me, and we're going to be better collectively. So yeah, I think that spirit of curiosity, but coupling it with a genuine humility and making sure that there's no level of patronizing, I think would be really important.
Thank you, Matt. And Andrea just put a resource in the chat as well. So a link around white supremacy. So, as all this is being said, what I would caution you as you roll out these practices is, if there's going to be something that, to promote collaboration, that from the get-go, you're really mapping out, like, who are we gathering information from, for what purpose, how is it going to be shared, what is the feedback loop, how it will inform our decision making, and kind of that is a transparent process, and that the participants are aware of it. And also, how are you preparing the participants? I think, to Elizabeth's point, again, sometimes we think inviting someone to the table is that we're doing it, like, right, and that's just a checkbox, that's the tokenism. And how are we making sure that someone's prepared, they know who's going to be there, and that we're also working with the people that they might be presenting to, like, let's say this panel situation. Are the adults in the room prepared for that, and what they're, how are they welcoming those individuals, and creating space for them, making sure that they're aware of stepping back and allowing those voices. You can invite people to the table and then talk right over them. So it's really being intentional. I think on the surface, some of these things seem so obvious and like, oh yeah, that makes total sense, like, right? But to actually implement it, to be aware of the intersection with racism and oppression in our culture takes a whole lot more work. Really being very, very, clear about what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it, and that we're having a process in place to see how we've made progress or not. Because if we misstep, we need to be able to catch that. Because we will sometimes, we're going to make mistakes, that happens. But are we including in our process a way to touch base with the people, you know, that are impacted by whatever this initiative is or this change that's happening, and get their feedback? Here's what's going well. This did not meet the mark, you know, and then we can continue to change and evolve. Other just thoughts? This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Crystal, for sharing your experience with us and using it as a way to kind of move our discussion. Okay. So the last two principles we're going to cover is peer support. And so, you know, knowing that people exposed to trauma and adversity can benefit from from others who have had shared experience. And so these are thinking about things like sharing knowledge. Like sometimes we, you know, can educate, you know, a select group of people about trauma and ACEs and resilience, and forgetting the most important people who can benefit from it are the people who've experienced it. I'm sure we're all aware of stories, you know, just in our own lives or when we've learned about this information, or we've seen with others how it's just been a game changer. Like they can, you know, people can see and understand themselves and their experience in a new light with this information. So it should not be something that's held on to, but openly shared. And thinking about how it's shared and who shares it. And this is where that peer support can be very valuable. And making sure that, you know, collectively as a system and in organizations that this is available, peer support through advocates, youth peers, that it's a resource that our system values and promotes and has readily accessible, and also that the peers that are available are reflective of the community that is being served. So sometimes historically, I know, you know, there's been a mismatch there, and the people who are doing that advocacy work don't come from the same community, don't look like the people who are being served, and you know, that doesn't feel necessarily like that authentic peer support. And making sure, you know, they can serve in ways of that relationship building, in terms of entering into care, helping to navigate. Again, when you've lived through it, when you've experienced it, that can be such a valuable asset for individuals. And then thinking about cultural, historical, and gender issues. I know we've already been really kind of addressing this throughout our conversation, but just to really highlight this as an important core value is knowing and thinking about that intersection between trauma, racism, and discrimination, and that can heighten someone's vulnerability, that additional burden of toxic stress, the, you know, just what's been highlighted on this call in terms of the ongoing everyday potential for re-traumatization. And so really thinking about, you know, strategies that move past those cultural stereotypes and biases, the types of services that are offered, making sure there's things like gender responsive services, that we're elevating the value of traditional cultural connections and cultural practices, and that's included and respected and lifted in terms of planning care for individuals. When we're looking at our policies and protocols, again, through that lens, and you know, what are we doing that's for those individuals served, and also for our staff, to make sure that we're looking at those through that perspective, and how that, again, when we're not taking that into account, as Andrew was talking about, you know, our dominant culture is steeped in white supremacy. And if we're not aware of that, if we're not intentionally being aware and mindful and moving against that, that's going to be our default mode. That's going to be the default lens. It's in, as she said, in the air we breathe. And so we really need to be challenging ourselves and making sure, again, that we have true representation and voices kind of that are looking at those policies and procedures with actual opportunity for input and power to help shape and move those in a new direction. and really making sure that we're recognizing the impact of historical trauma, that we're educating those we serve and individuals about it, and that is, part of the work that we do, and in order to heal and recover. If we can't name it, we can't heal from it. And so we need to lift that up and be thinking about how that might be impacting what we're experiencing or an individual might be experiencing today. So kind of a way to think about this, and promoting what is, known as cultural humility. And this kind of resonates with that curiosity, is this acronym ASSESS. So, asking questions, but in a way that is safe and non-intrusive, but, with a real kind of sense of curiosity, understanding where your own self is, doing your own work, and coming from a place of non-judgment. Really making sure that we're coming from a place of compassion and generosity in terms of trying to understand someone, promoting that safe, welcoming environment, and meeting someone where they're at, recognizing, when you first meet someone, whether it's a colleague or a new colleague or an individual you might be working with, again, that they may have no reason to trust you, to trust what you're there to offer, and really knowing that and appreciating that, and then kind of building from wherever they are. This is an ongoing process. This isn't something, again, this is not one of those checkbox things. Most things aren't, that are really worthwhile and that are going to result in change. And so how do you make sure that this is part of the way that you personally kind of engage, and that this is part of the culture within the organization about how you interact with each and across with each other? So just some speed bumps that can get in the way of doing this work. And what I mean by this is, part of our culture, the way we're working, the pressures we feel, the sense of urgency can lead us to act in ways that could actually result in us leaning into that default mode of thinking, leaning into our biases, our assumptions, what we expect to see, how we expect someone to react or respond. And so there's things that can slow us down so that we can actually be more present and make sure we're being intentional about our work. So one of those things is monotasking. So we live in a world and an illusion that we can multitask. Many of us know that that's just really not physiologically possible. When we think we're multitasking, we're actually monotasking, but moving quickly between two different tasks. And what we know from the research is that we're actually less effective in those tasks when we're multitasking. So when we can just focus on one thing at a time and one thing only, we're going to be more effective. And so, just it's everything from doing, working on one thing at a time. And it's hard right now too, right? If we're working virtually, sometimes we can be more inclined to be on a call and doing email at the same time. But really, kind of stopping and really being present for what the task is before us, or who the person is before us, and being present with that, we will often kind of be able then to kind of lean into that curiosity we're trying to promote, and making sure we're living into those values. Working in a team, and I think this is reflective of what Matt was saying earlier, the more different views and perspectives we can welcome and genuinely and authentically hear, the greater the possibilities are on the table, right? And we're going to come up with the best solution and not default to kind of a sense of group think when we have all like-minded or similar people at the table. That can be dangerous, or just leaning in, just working solo too, right? Because we're going to come with our own perspective. So using using the team. Mindfulness practice can always be helpful, and that doesn't mean formally sitting on a cushion and engaging in meditation, which could be part of that, but it's really taking that pause, taking that breath, slowing down, and making sure that you're present with the activity that you're engaged in. So just want to, again, pause and reflect. We're going to go into an activity in just a minute, but any reflection just on what was just kind of covered? Any other strategies for slowing down, and any other speed bumps you found to be effective? Let's see,
I can say I really did like what the ASSESS acronym stood for. I think I would like to incorporate that somehow in our practices.
Great, thank you for that feedback. And you will get the slide deck, so we'll make that available to everyone. And I think that also is one of those strategies that gives everyone kind of a common frame of reference, like, right, that we're all kind of using this assess and a way to check in with each other. Like, did you assess? Like, shorthand. So great. Any other reflections at this point? Yeah, Maria.
Something. So I thought of it first when you had the line about listening to listen and not to respond. So like one strategy for me, if I am kind of zoning out, and this might not work for everyone, but while the person is talking, so like while you were talking, I was kind of repeating exactly what you were saying. So it's like a millisecond off, but it gets my brain to not be able to think to something else because I'm repeating what you're saying, but in my head. And then also it kind of helps me have a better memory. So I'll remember what you were saying better because it's in my brain twice.
Thanks for sharing that strategy. That's why I tend to be a written note taker when I'm like on things, when I'm writing, even though most of my notes I write, I never look at again, but it helps me stay present. I'm in good company. I'm seeing some other people. I think it might be partly generational because I don't know how much note taking happens anymore in schools. All right, we'll go back. We have a few more slides to get through and then we're going to break out into our groups. Okay, so just in terms of the re-traumatization, and I think this, just kind of puts a little point on what Crystal brought up for us before, is just really being aware of this, being aware of kind of the role of oppression and social oppression for individuals and in organizations, and that if we're really striving to be an anti-oppressive organization that is using anti-oppressive practices, we really have to be very clear and intentional about the work that we're doing, being aware of how people have been oppressed previously and historically, and honestly, not even previously, right? Currently, that's still happening. And we always just have to be asking ourselves, is this practice, is this change we're going to make or something we're going to roll out anti-oppressive, or could it be potentially oppressive? And really making sure we're pausing to think about that and get the input we need from the people who are going to be most impacted by it. Really making sure that we're not making decisions for anyone, we're making decisions with people with the real input that's going to help us to make that informed decision. So a way to kind of do that is to kind of go through this kind of question process to really make sure we're promoting equity. And, have I ensured actions that are allowing for equitable, collaborative, and power sharing? And how do I know this? How is it more than just a gut response that I think I did it, or I checked the box, or I, had these people at the conversation, so yes, their voice was represented. But how do I truly know that I've really gotten and done these things? And so if yes, how do I promote these actions kind of systemically? And if not, what do I need to do differently? And coming into each interaction, really thinking about, how am I thinking about my own power and privilege and social location, and how it might impact my interactions in this moment, in this situation? And coming in with really clear self-awareness, right? So this is, again, where that mindfulness is so important, that we're not just kind of, guilty of this, right? Like I could have a day when I'm going from one Zoom call to the next Zoom call. And, am I really thinking about that before I engage in a conversation with someone? And I can't say that I always do, right? So how do we slow down and make sure? And also to question and challenge our ways of thinking, and how do we do this individually? How do we do this collectively among our team, our colleagues? Because we have our default ways of thinking, and how do we make sure we're building in the opportunity to have that challenge, but in a supportive way, right? A safe way that may cause some discomfort as I think about something from a new way, but ultimately is going to lead us to a better place. I see that there's a message in the chat. Okay, so someone had to leave. All right. So we will be moving in a minute, but I know we've brought this versions of this slide before. So just, thinking about the work we're doing and being trauma informed and being equity based is, moving from a place of inequality to, beyond equality and equity, but really to justice, right? So fixing the system so that people actually have equal access with both the tools and opportunities to get kind of meet their needs and to have the opportunities to be successful and contribute their talents, their value in a way that is beyond thinking about equity or equality, how we've traditionally thought about that. So kind of thinking about this shift all the way through is, kind of when we think about trauma informed, we're going, kind of moving from, we've talked about this before, what's wrong with you to what happened to you, but even going further still and pushing ourselves to what's right with you and what can help you heal and grow, right? So how are we moving to this state of really justice, that we're recognizing people's strengths, that we're providing them access and opportunities to heal, to recover, to contribute, to thrive in their world and in their own way. So what I'd like to do now is take some time to move back into our teams and really think about the values and how you yourself and the team at large might be able to move some of these practices within the work that you're doing within your own organization. And you might think about focusing on, one or two of these values. You might talk about more than that, but really thinking about what would this really look like for myself and for us collectively as an organization to move practice. So